We don't often talk about the eastern side of Mendoza when we think of fine wines in Argentina, but this is very much the powerhouse of Argentine wine. There are over 60,000 hectares in Eastern Mendoza, which is almost half of Mendoza's production. Now there is a lot of kind of family wines here. This is all vino paterro, homemade jug wine. Some of it's actually quite good. We'll taste this to see later. But there's also some new winemakers, a new wave of wine that's really kind of changing the face of Eastern Mendoza. And so I want to introduce you today to some of those winemakers that are really bringing up the quality of el este, and we'll explore the history too. I'm gonna get my vino paterro for later. This is Andres Vignoni, but everyone calls him Mono, which is his nickname meaning monkey. Mono is one of the most promising winemakers in Mendoza's Yucca Valley, but he, like many of Mendoza's winemakers, actually comes from the east, and his family still have a vineyard there today. So Mono, tell me, we're going to talk about the history of el este. Why are we here on the train tracks?
Well, when you think about the East Zone, like 70 years ago or maybe 50 years ago, there was really the heart of the viticulture in Argentina. In these rails, all the wine was, loaded and sent to Buenos Aires, when all the people drank wine, like 90 liters per capita per year. It was crazy, and all the wine was bottled there. You can see a lot of wineries around because everyone has their own winery very close to the railways to load it and bottle there.
Excellent. So like the original bulk wine business, you would literally load it on from the winery into barrels?
No. It was actually, in a big bulk wagons,
The train wagons and then
Yeah, it was crazy. But after with the law, everything was cut and everything has to be bottled in Mendoza.
So starting here in the east, on the train tracks, let's go see some vineyards.
Let's go.
So we haven't reached the vineyards yet, but this is important. We're in the dried riverbed. Why is this riverbed, important to the development of the East?
Well, actually we are in the river, the Tunuyán River path, and here there was a huge amount of water, and the valley surrounding this was cultivated by the Huarpes. So
the Huarpes being the native people here before the Spanish.
Yeah, before the Spanish. So they built, an irrigation system that after all the Spanish took it to develop all the crops and all the vineyards here. So this is the very first region in Mendoza to be cultivated in a vast surface.
Excellent. We are in the desert.
We are. But all the water is in the Carrizal. It's
in the big dams.
Yeah.
There's still water somewhere.
Yeah.
As Mono says, Eastern Mendoza really is the origin story of Argentina's thriving wine industry, where most of the Italian and Spanish immigrants settled to not only make wines, but also grow fruit and vegetables. It really was the breadbasket of Mendoza. Wines were mainly made from Criolla varieties. We're going to talk a lot about Criolla, and there are hundreds of different Criolla varieties. But the main thing to know is that these are a large family of grape varieties stemming from those originally brought by the Spanish back in the 1500s. The East is filled with these old vines of Criolla. So we're in the vineyard of your grandfathers that planted this. This is very typical of the East, isn't it? Can you tell us a bit about how the viticulture is here, what they planted, why we're in this beautiful parral?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have like two kinds of plantations. This is the most typical plantation, that it's called parral or pergola, and it is due to have like a broader canopy and at the same time more production. So. At that time, what we looked for was, producing as much as we can, because we had to feed the country with wine.
Everyone was drinking a lot.
Everyone was drinking a lot.
This was really in like the 70s when everyone was drinking like 90 liters a capita.
I think between the 30s and the 70s, it was like the boom. In the morning and the lunchtime, in the night, obviously, there was wine.
Excellent. So big production. And these are the Criolla grape varieties. And I'm a big fan of the Criolla grape varieties,
Yeah.
especially, you're making some excellent Criolla wines now. And, tell me a bit about the character of these Criolla grape varieties. So productive, but what else?
Well, actually, it's crazy because we put in a big bag called Criolla, like 200 varieties. So, and they are all mixed. For example, here we have white, some red, some rosé, yeah, pink. I don't like to say pink bag, yeah. And they were all planted together because each of them gave a characteristic to the wine. So, at that time, they make like big quantities of wine, but everything was planted in a purpose. So, some of them gave the volume, some of them gave the structure, some of them the aromas. So you have like Torrontés in the middle of a Criolla Chica, Criolla Grande, Moscatel, all together, and it was like a real field blend at the time.
The story of the booming East changed in the 1980s. A combination of soaring inflation, financial crises, and falling local consumption spelt disaster for the region. Grape prices plummeted by 80%, and families in wine went bust or had to abandon production completely. By the time the market started recovering in the 2000s, wine production had moved further south, with all eyes on Luján de Cuyo and the Yuco Valley. Many of Eastern Mendoza's wineries were ghosts of the past. It is only today that we are seeing the seeds of a renaissance. The new generation of these wine families are trying to do something to bring back the fortunes of the East and protect the wealth of old vines here. Mono and his brother Santi are part of that movement, as is Lucas Niven. Lucas is perhaps the winemaker in Argentina to know for Criolla wines. He quit his job at one of Argentina's most famous wineries back in 2015 in order to dedicate himself to converting his family winery in Junin and make fine wines with these undervalued old vines in el este. Lucas, I think you were really one of the first winemakers here to put Criolla grapes on the map and talk about the potential of Criolla here in the East. Why did you change the family winery to go from bulk wine to focusing on individual fine wines from Criolla? What is the potential you see?
Okay, in the beginning, the family need change the future of this winery and this vineyard. And I think in Criolla was a good wine, easy to drink for the consumer, and different. Criolla in that moment was cheap wine and bad wine, and change for the destiny about this wine. And I think in change everything. Good label, different, good wine, easy to drink, good price for all the people.
Yeah. Vino del pueblo.
Vino del pueblo, exactamente.
Wine for the village.
Exactly, yes. That was the beginning about criollas. Mendoza have a lot of criollas and different old criollas. This is the old vines 100 years ago planted here. And it's really interesting when you have a lot of
the diversity
wild criollas.
Yeah.
In different place, and crazy wine, good wines was good idea in that moment. Very difficult, not easy, but in this moment we sell criollas and different style criollas. We have the white wines, rosé, naranjo, orange, petnat, and everything. We have the good portfolio, very big portfolio about criollas. And this is really good for me. Criollas is the opportunity, it's the family. It's not only Malbec. You have the big family for make different wines.
I think you've done a great job, and I'm very grateful for the work that you've done in Criolla, because I think it gives us such a diverse expression and so unique and different. Tell me about the diversity of Criolla varieties, because, I think in my book I've highlighted about 20,
Exactly.
but in your vineyard you've got a lot more than that. So how many different
exactly.
Criolla varieties do you think there are?
Wow, here we have a lot of different criollas. We have Cereza, Pedro Jiménez, Malvasía Criolla, Canela, Quebranta, Criolla Chica, Moscatel Rosado, It's a big family. Maybe in this vineyard we have only 100 criollas, different criollas.
Wow.
It's a lot of criollas, big family, and we can play with when queremos hacer vinos distintos.
You want to make the different wines, and I think you do. And I think I think it's a nice signature that the east of Mendoza has today.
The east of Mendoza is criollas. For me, is the top here. We have a lot of and all vineyards. This is very important. All vines.
A wine for the village, for the world.
Yes, exactly.
Salud.
Salud.
Thank you.
Sante.
Another of the key winemakers to watch here in Eastern Mendoza is Matias Morcos. He's only 27, but Matias is making some of the juiciest and most elegant wines in the region. He's also passionate about making a difference before it is too late.
We have a problem that a lot of little grape growers are abandoning their vineyards, sometimes because the new generations wants to be TikToker and YouTubers and influencers, and not everyone is want to be in the vineyard. But the biggest issue is that they doesn't make any money. They are losing money year per year.
The grape prices are really cheap here.
Are very, very cheap because the wines that we are making are focused on the entry-level bulk industry. But at the same time, I believe that we have a lot of potential with all that 100 years old pergolas from Criolla, from Moscatel, Pedro Jimenez. So what we are doing is to show to the world that, and to the world is also Mendoza, because we have to believe in that, to show that there is a lot of potential in the Criolla, in the old vines, in the 100 years old pergola. And we really believe that there is another Argentina, another Mendoza beyond the classic Malbec. And we have another kind of wines to show to the world here. Maybe fresher, maybe easy to drink, but very different. You're tasting it. How do you see?
Absolutely. This is something I love about this kind of new movement here in the East, is using these incredible old vines and these distinctive Criolla varieties, which you don't get anywhere else in the world. Tell me about, the vines that you use for this. How old are these Criolla vines and what variety are we talking about?
Those vines are very old. That's the age. It's like we go, we see, and we say, okay, no, they're too old. That doesn't have papers. And we have a lot of troubles because sometimes the papers say this is white and the vineyard is red and other grapes. Here the grapes are mixed because our grandfathers just harvest once a year all together and make the Criollo Argentino wine.
Big field blend.
Yes, that's the blend. And we have Criolla Chica, Criolla Grande, Cereza, Moscatel, Pedro Jimenez. That is not the same Pedro Jimenez that is in Spain. It's our Pedro Jimenez. For my wine, we choose just Criolla Chica. We try to choose, then it's a bit messy because it has another potential. I don't know, it's more interesting, maybe it's more elegant, but then the Criolla Grande, the Cereza, and the Moscatel are fresher, are wines that it's very interesting for us to be here talking with you with that bottle, but this bottle could also be in a party with two eyes and with friends.
I can see how this is a fun wine to party with. I can see why you want to drink it by the swimming pool. But then also I think it has acidity, it has freshness, it has fine tannins, it has lots of different layers of aromas. It's interesting, it's engaging as well.
Yes. We are. That's the part that we are proud. Not because we are the winemakers, that's the place where we belong, that is showing that in the bottle, and we are trying to work with our neighbors, with other wineries from the East Zone to make that kind of wines. Here, for me, the revolution is not that I make a lot of bottles and make some money, it's that the pergolas doesn't get abandoned.
Yeah,
that's the point. So it's to show to my friends that, come on, there is potential. Let's go make wine together and sell it. Is the point.
Excellent. Well, cheers to the revolution of the East,
Thank
the
you.
old vines, to the small growers, to the fresh wines.
And thank you, Amanda, for being here and to show it to the world. For us, it's very important.
Thank you. Salud.
Salud.
Eastern Mendoza really is a land of contrasts. Here we have one of the most historic regions of Argentina, a powerhouse, a juggernaut of wine for many years. But today it's also one of the areas that's really got an incredible new generation of winemakers that are focusing on making innovative wines and bringing value to these incredible old vines. It's here where we have the heartland of Criolla varieties, which are so distinctive to Argentina and South America. And these are the kind of wines I love to drink in the summer. Fresh, gluggable, distinctive, and actually a bargain. So cheers, vamos to the revolution of the East. Salud.